What's up, everybody? Uh, this is a piece from Robert Ogman's book, Against the Nation, Anti-National Politics in Germany. I'm going to read the back page of the book. It says, following the German reunification process in the 1990s, a new movement appeared in Germany. This movement rejected all forms of nationalism, including the desirability and legitimacy of national communities, borders, and the existence of the nation-state itself. I'm reading this from a paperback book, but I'm going to try to look things up anyway for this particular book. German reunification was the process of reestablishing Germany as a single sovereign state, which began on the 9th of November 1989 and culminated on the 3rd of October 1990 with the dissolution of the GDR, German Democratic Republic, and the integration of the German Democratic Republic's re-established constituent federated states into the Federal Republic of Germany to form present-day Germany. This date, the 3rd of October 1990, was chosen as the customary German Unity Day, and has thereafter been celebrated each year as a national holiday in Germany since 1991. On the same date, East and West Berlin were also reunified into a single city, which became the capital of Germany. The East German government, controlled by the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, SED, started to falter on the 2nd of May 1989 when the removal of Hungary's border fence with Austria opened a hole in the Iron Curtain. The border was still closely guarded, but the pan-European picnic and the indecisive reaction of the rulers of the Eastern Bloc set in motion an irreversible movement. It allowed an exodus of thousands of East Germans fleeing to West Germany via Hungary. The Peaceful Revolution, which is like a proper name, part of the international revolutions of 1989, included a series of protests by East German citizens, led to the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989, and the GDR's first free elections later on 18th of March 1990, and then to negotiations between the two countries that culminated in a unification treaty. Other negotiations between the two Germanys and the four occupying powers in Germany produced the Treaty on the Final Settlement with Respect to Germany, which is a proper name, which granted on the 15th of March 1991 full sovereignty to a reunified German state, whose two parts were previously bound by a number of limitations stemming from their post-World War II status as occupation zones. Though only on the 31st of August 1994 did the last Russian occupation troops leave Germany. After the end of World War II in Europe, the old German Reich was abolished and Germany was occupied and divided by the four Allied countries. There was no peace treaty. Two countries emerged. The American-occupied, British-occupied, and French-occupied zones combined to form the FRG, i.e. West Germany, on the 23rd of May 1949. The Soviet-occupied zone formed the GDR, i.e. East Germany, in October 1949. The West German state joined NATO in 1955. In 1990, a range of opinions continued to be maintained over whether a reunited Germany could be said to represent, quote, Germany as a whole, end quote, for this purpose. In the context of the revolutions of 1989, on the 12th of September 1990, under the 2+4 treaty with the four allies, both East and West Germany committed to the principle that their joint pre-1990 boundary constituted the entire territory that could be claimed by a government of Germany. The reunited state is not a successor state, but an enlarged continuation of the 1949 to 1990 West German state. The enlarged Federal Republic of Germany retained the West German seats in the governing bodies of the European Economic Community, EC, later the European Union, and in international organizations including the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and the United Nations, UN, while relinquishing membership in the Warsaw Pact and other international organizations to which only East Germany belonged. So that is the German reunification. And I'll return to the back of the book. Against the Nation, the book, covers the background of this movement, the rise of neo-Nazism, racist violence, restriction and immigration policies, and growing state power, as well as its urge to organize society around other principles than nationality. By examining the campaigns and documents of the various anti-national tendencies in Germany during this period, Robert Ogman takes a fresh look at the question of nationalism and nationalism's relationship to left politics. Now let's see if there's anything on the internet about Robert Ogman. Looks like Ogman's a PhD student at De Montfort University in Leicester. His little profile on here says, Robert Ogman's research interests include the current economic crisis, struggles over competing exit strategies, and new modes and trajectories of crisis governance. He previously focused on the U.S. Occupy movement as a reaction to growing social and material inequalities and related erosion of democracy. In Ogman's doctoral research, he applies a cultural political economy approach inspired by Bob Jessup and Nagai Ling Sum to the reproduction and renegotiation of hegemony, analyzing the growing, quote, social investment market, end quote, in the US and UK. This involves a new wave of, quote, public responsibility, end quote, initiatives that, rather than constraining market forces, modify, reproduce, and expand market modes of governance in response to new social, political, and economic challenges. The centerpiece of this investigation is an empirical study of the increasingly popular policy instrument known as social impact bonds, using the US and UK as case studies. SIBs claim to address growing social needs in a time of fiscal crisis by, quote, mobilizing private capital for public good, end quote. These are constructed as a way of addressing social crises exacerbated by austerity while avoiding a politics of redistribution via the incentivization of private investment in performance-based social policy interventions. These new products claim to provide a win-win situation, quote, blending fiscal and social benefits, end quote, that increase funding for service provision, provide financial returns to investors, and relieve overstretched government purses. The research project examines SIBs as part of a, quote, social neoliberal, end quote, compromise, which attempts to address weaknesses in the dominant austerity paradigm without, however, returning to a politics of redistribution. It interrogates both the proposed and actual changes in the dynamic relations between state, market, and civil society in the investigated cases, as well as the, quote, responsible capitalism, end quote, discourse that accompany these initiatives, focusing in particular on the tension between their public and private goals. It looks at the opportunities, limitations, and contradictions of social impact bonds as a sustainable and transformative reform project. In addition to Ogman's scholarly work, Robert Ogman has been involved in a host of community and civil society initiatives to counter the social polarization and de-democratization resulting from neoliberal crisis management strategies. Ogman is interested in building the links between critical research and engaged practice as part of a democratic renewal. So I don't know how old that is. I don't know if... it looks like he has articles in Haaretz. The last article he wrote for Haaretz, which is like the left liberal paper in Israel, was on 2019. It looks like he said, in fact, he did receive his PhD. So he's no longer a student. It looks like he's part of the Institute for Social Ecology, which is where I first know him from. But anyway, let me continue. Okay, so that's the back cover. We've seen who Robert Ogman is. This book was released by newcompass.net, which is or New Compass Press, which either is or was a press affiliated with like social ecology, like Bookchin type politics. Yeah, it says, since 2011, New Compass has been publishing political literature on social ecology, participatory democracy, movement building, and social emancipation. We want to present ideas that can help turn our social and environmental networks into a force for change. In 2021, we co-founded Load and now make up its English language section. The old New Compass website and blog can still be accessed online. So, all right. So, anything else from these front pages? New Compass Press operates out of Norway, and the design and layout of this book was was done by Eirik Eiglad, who has a couple works on here about left anti-Semitism coming from a social ecology inspired direction. He had a book he had an essay in one of the books on new anti-Semitism that I've read, where he talks about anarchism and the anarchism and anti-Zionism. Yeah, it says New Compass is Camilla Svensson Skriung, Sveinung Legard, Eirik Eiglad, Peter Munsterman, Christian Vidvist, Lisa Roth, and Camilla Hansen. This book was published in 2013. Its contents include an introduction, The Left and the Nation, German Nationalism After Reunification, Never Again Germany! Something Better Than the Nation, Anti-National Perspectives. Wikipedia says never again is a phrase or slogan which is associated with the lessons of the Holocaust and other genocides. Never again was used by liberated prisoners at Buchenwald concentration camp to denounce fascism. Never again was popularized by Jewish Defense League founder Meir Kahan in his 1971 book, Never Again, A Program for Survival. Meir Kahan is a very bad man, if you did not know. He's like a far-right Jewish nationalist. The exact meaning of the phrase is debated, including whether it should be used as a particularistic command to avert a second Holocaust of Jews, or whether never again is a universalist injunction to prevent all forms of genocide. The phrase is widely used by politicians and writers, and it also appears on many Holocaust memorials. Never again has also been appropriated as a political slogan for other causes, from commemoration of the 1976 coup in Argentina, the promotion of gun control or abortion rights, and as an injunction to war on terror after the September 11th attacks. Back to the text. Acknowledgements. This book would not have been possible without the encouragement from and dialogue with Martina, Olaf, Spencer, and Peter, amongst others. Thank you also to New Compass for helping me turn the manuscript into a book, and for the opportunity to present this topic to a wider audience. The research was conducted with the support of a scholarship from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Robert Ogman. I don't know who any of these people are, but I'm going to guess Olaf might be Olaf, was it Kirstenmacher? Spencer might be Spencer Sunshine, and Peter might be Peter Studemeyer, who's written a lot on like ecological fascism and shit like that. Now here I'm finally going to start actually reading the piece. The piece for this video is simply the introduction. In March 2009, just months after the outbreak of the global economic crisis, 50,000 people marched through the streets of Berlin and Frankfurt declaring, quote, "We won't pay for your crisis," end quote. It was part of an international day of protest against the negative material impact endured by the general population for the crisis and neoliberal crisis management. The broad coalition included labor unions, alter globalization associations, the Left Party, or Die Linke, student organizations, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, and radical left groups, brought together widely divergent perspectives regarding the root and potential solution to the crisis. In Frankfurt, this was strongly shown on the question of nationalism. As the Left Party leader, Oscar Lafontaine, began his speech at the closing rally, Oscar Lafontaine only managed to get a few words out before being pelted with eggs by demonstrators who drowned him out, saying, "Never again Germany," and, quote, "Refugees stay, deport Lafontaine." What the hell is his name? Oscar? Wikipedia says Oscar Lafontaine was born in 1943. Oscar Lafontaine is a German politician. Oscar Lafontaine served as minister-president of the state of Saarland from 1985 to 1998 and was federal leader of the Social Democratic Party from 1995 to 1999. He was the lead candidate for the SPD in the 1990 German federal election, but lost by a wide margin. Oscar Lafontaine served as Minister of Finance under Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. After the SPD's victory in the 1998 federal election, but resigned from both the ministry and Bundestag less than 6 months later, positioning Oscar Lafontaine's self as a popular opponent of Schröder's policies in the tabloid press. I think Gerhard Schröder was like the Tony Blair Bill equivalent in Germany, I'm pretty sure. In the lead up to the 2005 federal election, as a reaction to Schröder's Agenda 2010 reforms, Lafontaine co-founded the left-wing party Labor and Social Justice, the electoral alternative. Following a merger with the Party of Democratic Socialism in June 2007, Oscar Lafontaine became co-chairman of the left. Oscar Lafontaine was the lead candidate for the Saarland branch of the party in the 2009 Saarland state election, where it won over 20% of the vote. Oscar Lafontaine announced his resignation from all federal political functions after being diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2009. Oscar Lafontaine retained his position as a member of the Saarland legislature, and from May 2012 to 2022, Oscar Lafontaine was the leader of the opposition in Saarland. LaFontaine resigned from the Left Party on the 17th of March 2022 because it was no longer a, quote, alternative to the politics of social insecurity and inequality, end quote, he said. Back to the text. The 2,000-person social revolutionary and anti-national bloc who claimed responsibility for the disruption described LaFontaine's appearance as a, quote, provocation because of his past support for nationalist positions. As former head of the Social Democratic Party, Oscar LaFontaine signed policies deeply curtailing asylum rights and supported the construction of detention centers in North Africa to prevent refugees from reaching Germany. Oscar LaFontaine also blamed migrants for wage suppression and cuts in social expenditures, and supported restrictions on migrants' access to the social welfare system. Whereas the bloc targeted LaFontaine for his policies and positions, these were not seen as mere personal failures, but rather as the result of systematic pressures. Instead of facing and confronting these structural conflicts and contradictions of capitalism, they argued, LaFontaine sought to, quote, solve them within the framework of nation states. In the end, this approach, quote, comes to its logical conclusion, end quote, that, quote, in this society, social provisions belong only to bracket national and bracket citizens alone, end quote. To those of this nation state, quote, and the rest of the world must be kept out with force, end quote. The criticized LaFontaine wrote in his own words, quote, bracket, in a, and bracket, modern state, the responsibilities of the state must be guaranteed, above all to care for those who are its citizens, and for those who contribute to the finances of the community, end quote. According to this logic, the state is obligated to, quote, protect its citizens and prevent parents from becoming unemployed because of foreign workers who take their jobs for low pay, end quote. Oscar LaFontaine. Nationalism has been a long-standing historical challenge for the left. Yet, while critiques of nationalism have been articulated by various left figures throughout the 20th century, the emergence of an explicitly anti-national tendency and social movement discourse only first emerged in the political conjuncture that began with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Previously, the dominant left orientation relied on a positive affirmation of the, quote, nation. The old left's call for proletarian internationalism sought to build solidarity between different national working classes, while the new left's anti-imperialism meant supporting, quote, national self-determination, end quote, in the global south. With the opening of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent, quote, German reunification, end quote, a strong resurgence of nationalism was felt in both East and West German states. Wikipedia for German nationalism says, just because I want to read this, it seems fairly obvious what it is, but usually Wikipedia will provide some historical context for the specificities of German nationalism. German nationalism is an ideological notion that promotes the unity of Germans and of the Germanosphere into one unified nation-state. German nationalism also emphasizes and takes pride in the patriotism and national identity of Germans as one nation and one people. The earliest origins of German nationalism began with the birth of Romantic nationalism during the Napoleonic Wars, when pan-Germanism started to rise. Advocacy of a German nation-state began to become an important political force in response to the invasion of German territories by France under Napoleon Bonaparte. In the 19th century, Germans debated the German question over whether the German nation-state should comprise a, quote, lesser Germany that excluded the Austrian Empire or a, quote, greater Germany that included the Austrian Empire or its German-speaking part. The faction led by Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck succeeded in forging a lesser Germany. Aggressive German nationalism and territorial expansion was a key factor leading to both world wars. Prior to World War I, Germany had established a colonial empire in hopes of rivaling Britain and France. In the 1930s, the Nazis came to power and sought to unify all ethnic Germans under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, eventually leading to the extermination of Jews, Poles, Romani, and other people deemed Untermenschen, subhumans, in the Holocaust during World War II. That's a little too simplistic there. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, the country was divided into East and West Germany in the opening acts of the Cold War, and each state retained a sense of German identity and held reunification as a goal, albeit in different contexts. The creation of the European Union was in part an effort to harness German identity to a European identity. West Germany underwent West Germany's economic miracle following the war, which led to the creation of a guest worker program. Many of these workers ended up settling in Germany, which has led to tensions around questions of national and cultural identity, especially with regard to Turks who settled in Germany. German reunification was achieved in 1990 following Die Wende, an event that caused some alarm both inside and outside Germany. Germany has emerged as a great power inside Europe and in the world. Germany's role in the European debt crisis and the European migrant crisis have led to criticism of German authoritarian abuse of its power, especially with regard to the Greek debt crisis, and raised questions within and outside Germany as to Germany's role in the world. Due to post-1945 repudiation of the Nazi regime and the Nazi regime's atrocities, German nationalism has been generally viewed in the country as taboo, and people within Germany have struggled to find ways to acknowledge its past but take pride in its past and present accomplishments. The German question has never been fully resolved in this regard. A wave of national pride swept the country when it hosted the 2006 FIFA World Cup. Far-right parties that stress German national identity and pride have existed since the end of World War II, but have never governed. According to the Correlates of War project, patriotism in Germany before World War I ranked at or near the top, whereas today patriotism in Germany ranks at or near the bottom of patriotism surveys. However, there are also other surveys according to which modern Germany is indeed very patriotic. So, that's German nationalism. Back to the text. This German nationalism came not only in the guise of neo-fascism, which erupted across Europe, but in a popular nationalist euphoria across the political spectrum. It was not limited to the German province, but also advanced in the mainstream press, as well as in policy decisions strengthening the national border and the ethnic character of the state, and justifying Germany's geopolitical goals on the international level. An anti-national critique was born in the struggles of social movements against this nationalist wave. Not only did these movements reject nationalism, understood as national chauvinism or national antagonism, but also nationalism's foundation, quote, the nation, end quote, and the nation state as such. This represented a clear break with the left's inherited positions on nationalism. Footnote. Throughout this book, a, quote, nation is taken to be a, quote, imaginary community, a modern phenomenon born with the emergence of capitalist society. This is both a basic assumption of this book and a common denominator of the anti-national tendency, even as actors within this milieu drew from other theories to sharpen and specify their analysis. Throughout the book, where the term, quote, nation, end quote, is used, it will always be regarded as a, quote, imaginary community, end quote, brought into existence by certain social and material conditions, and never as a natural fact divorced from them. See Benedict Anderson's book, Imagined Communities, published with Verso in 2002. End footnote. I'm going to look up two things. First, I want to look up the nation state real quick. A nation state is a political unit where the state, a centralized political organization ruling over a population within a territory, and the nation, a community based on common identity, are congruent. It is a more precise concept than, quote, country, since a country does not need to have a predominant national or ethnic group. A nation, sometimes used in the sense of a common ethnicity, may include a diaspora or refugees who live outside the nation state. Some nations of this sense do not have a state where that ethnicity predominates. In a more general sense, a nation state is simply a large, politically sovereign country or administrative territory. A nation state may be contrasted with 1. An empire, a political unit made up of several territories and peoples, typically established through conquest and marked by a dominant center and subordinate peripheries. 2. A multinational state where no one ethnic or cultural group dominates. Such a state may also be considered a multicultural state depending on the degree of cultural assimilation of various groups. 3. A city-state which is both smaller than a, quote, nation in the sense of a, quote, large sovereign country, and which may or may not be dominated by all or part of a single, quote, nation in the sense of a common ethnicity or culture. 4. A confederation, a league of sovereign states which might or might not include nation states. And 5. A federated state which may or may not be a nation state and which is only partially self-governing within a larger federation. For example, the state boundaries of Bosnia and Herzegovina are drawn along ethnic lines, but those of the United States are not. This article mainly discusses the more specific definition of a nation-state as a typically sovereign country dominated by a particular ethnicity. And then the Wikipedia for nation itself says, a nation is a type of social organization where a collective identity, a national identity, has emerged from a combination of shared features across a given population, such as language, history, ethnicity, culture, territory, or society. Some nations are constructed around ethnicity, see ethnic nationalism, while others are bound by political constitutions, see civic nationalism. A nation is generally more overtly political than an ethnic group. Benedict Anderson defines a nation as, quote, an imagined political community, ... imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion, end quote. While Anthony D. Smith defines nations as cultural political communities that have become conscious of their autonomy, unity, and particular interests. The consensus among scholars is that nations are socially constructed, historically contingent, organizationally flexible, and a distinctly modern phenomenon. Throughout history, people have had an attachment to their kin group and traditions, territorial authorities, and their homeland. But nationalism, the belief that the state and nation should align as a nation-state, did not become a prominent ideology until the end of the 18th century, or 1700s if you didn't know. The description on Verso for imagined communities, reflection on the origin and spread of nationalism. We see defining best-selling book on the history, origins, and development of nationalism. It says, what are the imagined communities that compel men to kill or to die for an idea of a nation? This notion of nationhood had its origins in the founding of the Americas, but was then adopted and transformed by populist movements in 19th century Europe. It became the rallying cry for anti-imperialism as well as the abiding explanation for colonialism. In this scintillating, groundbreaking work of intellectual history, Anderson explores how ideas are formed and reformulated at every level, from high politics to popular culture, and the way that they can make people do extraordinary things. In the 21st century, these debates on the nature of the nation state are even more urgent. As new nations arise vying for influence and old empires decline, we must understand who we are as a community in the face of history and change. And Wikipedia says Benedict Anderson lived from 1936 to 2015. Benedict Anderson was an Anglo-Irish political scientist and historian who lived and taught in the United States. Anderson is best known for his 1983 book Imagined Communities, which explored the origins of nationalism. A polyglot with an interest in Southeast Asia, Benedict Anderson was the Aaron L. Binencorp Professor of International Studies, Government and Asian Studies at Cornell University. Anderson's work on the, quote, Cornell paper, end quote, which disputed the official story of Indonesia's 30th of September movement and the subsequent anti-communist purges of 1965 to 1966, led to Benedict Anderson's expulsion from Indonesia. Benedict Anderson was the elder brother of the historian Perry Anderson, who was an editor of New Left Review, and New Left Review and New Left Books became Verso Books. The Wikipedia for Imagined Communities says, Imagined Communities, Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism is a book by Benedict Anderson about the development of national feeling in different eras and throughout different geographies across the world. Imagined Communities introduced the term, quote, imagined communities, as a descriptor of a social group, specifically nations, and the term has since entered standard use in myriad political and social science fields. The book was first published in 1983 and was reissued with additional chapters in 1991 and a further revised version in 2006. Imagined Communities is widely considered influential in the social sciences, with Eric G.E. Zulo describing the book as, quote, perhaps the most read book about nationalism, end quote. It is among the top 10 most cited publications in the social sciences. According to Anderson's theory of imagined communities, the main historical causes of nationalism include the increasing importance of mass vernacular literacy, the movement to abolish the ideas of rule by divine right and hereditary monarchy. Quote, the concept is born in an age in which enlightenment and revolution were destroying the legitimacy of the divinely ordained, hierarchical dynastic Rome. Nations dream of being free. The gauge and emblem of this freedom is the sovereign state, end quote. Anderson. And the emergence of print capitalism, quote, the convergence of capitalism and print technology, ... standardization of national calendars, clocks, and language was embodied in books and the publication of daily newspapers, end quote. Benedict Anderson. All these phenomena coincided with the start of the Industrial Revolution. According to Anderson, nations are socially constructed. For Anderson, the idea of the, quote, nation is relatively new and is the product of various socio-material forces. Anderson defined a nation as, quote, an imagined political community, and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign, end quote. As Anderson puts it, a nation, quote, is imagined because of the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion, end quote. While members of the community probably will never know each of the other members face to face, they may have similar interests or identify as part of the same nation. Members hold in their minds a mental image of their affinity. For example, the nationhood felt with other members of your nation when your, quote, imagined community, end quote, participates in a larger event such as the Olympic Games. Nations are, quote, limited in that nations have, quote, finite if elastic boundaries beyond which lie other nations, end quote. Nations are, quote, sovereign, since no dynastic monarchy can claim authority over them in the modern period. Quote, the concept was born in an age in which Enlightenment and revolution were destroying the legitimacy of the divinely ordained hierarchical dynastic realm, coming to maturity at a stage of human history when even the most devout adherents of any universal religion were inescapably confronted with the living pluralism of such regions, and the allomorphism, incongruence, divide, between each faith's ontological claims and territorial stretch. Nations dream of being free, and, if under God, directly so. The gauge and emblem of this freedom is the sovereign state, end quote. Even though we may never see anyone in our imagined community, we still know they are there through communication means, such as newspapers. He describes the act of reading a daily paper as a, quote, mass ceremony, end quote. Quote, it is performed in silent privacy, in the lair of the skull, yet each communicant is well aware that the ceremony he performs is being replicated simultaneously by thousands or millions of others, of whose existence he is confident, yet of whose identity he has not the slightest notion, end quote. Finally, a nation is a community because, quote, regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each nation, the nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible, over the past 2 centuries, for so many millions of people not so much to kill as only to die for such limited imaginings, end quote. Benedict Anderson. The first major critique of Anderson's theory was Partha Chatterjee, who contends that European colonialism de facto imposed limits to nationalism, quote, even our imaginations must remain forever colonized, end quote. Chatterjee. Feminist historians such as Linda McDowell have noted a much broader but also unreflexive acceptance of nationalism as a gendered vision. Quote, the very term horizontal comradeship, brings with it connotations of masculine solidarity, end quote. Imagined communities does not directly address the gendered nature of nationalism, citation needed, end bracket. Adrian Hastings criticized the modernist interpretations of Anderson and another Marxist, Eric Hobsbawm, for restricting the emergence of nationalism to the modern period and the 18th century as ignoring the national feelings of the medieval period and the framework for national coexistence within the Bible and Christian theology. Dean Constantaros argued that Anderson's study of nationalism was far too broad, and the topic required a much more thorough investigation. Writing in a retrospective essay for the New Republic in 2024, Samuel Close Hunick argued that the book suffered from flaws in its Marxist framework, stating that it, quote, cannot explain the devotion that nations have and continue to inspire, end quote. While arguing further, Anderson's emphasis on, quote, nations inspiring love, end quote, ignores a history of racism and the rise of nationalism, ultimately claiming that while the book, quote, offers a compelling account of nationalism's origins, then it speaks little to the guises in which nationalism has reappeared in the 21st century. At the same time, quote, the notion that the conjoined spread of capitalism and nationalism, both of which were amply wrapped up in colonialism, had nothing to do with racism is risible, end quote. I guess that's Samuel Klaus Hunick. Okay, so thank you for indulging me in that little detour. Actually, hold on. There's a separate entry for the concept of imagined community. An imagined community is a concept developed by Benedict Anderson in Benedict Anderson's 1983 book, Imagined Communities to Analyze Nationalism. Anderson depicts a nation as a socially constructed community imagined by the people who perceive themselves as part of a group. Anderson focuses on the way media creates imagined communities, especially the power of print media in shaping an individual's social psyche. Anderson analyzes the written word, or a tool used by churches, authors, and media companies, notably books, newspapers, and magazines, as well as governmental tools such as the map, the census, and the museum. These tools were all built to target and define a mass audience in the public sphere through dominant images, ideologies, and language. Anderson explores the racist and colonial origins of these practices before explaining a general theory that demonstrates how contemporary governments and corporations can, and frequently do, utilize these same practices. These theories were not originally applied to the internet or television. I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's actually quite long. And I think we already get the idea. All right. Sorry about that. Back to the text. So, end footnote. The anti-nationalism tendency that emerged in the post-1989 setting had a negative orientation towards the nation. For the anti-national tendency, the nation-state was the engine of nationalism, not the means for overcoming nationalism. In no shape or form could, quote, the nation be the social force that would or could overthrow capitalism, nor could it herald in an emancipatory social order even exist in a post-capitalist society. The abolition of capitalism could not coincide with the nation. In response to the nationalist resurgence of the early 1990s, anti-fascist and anti-racist perspectives took on an increased importance for the left. Yet each had their limitations. While anti-fascism became a pole of identification for many social movement participants in the early 1990s, and anti-fascist action groups sprung up out of the ground to combat the burgeoning neo-Nazi movement, anti-fascism was circumscribed by a narrow focus on the fascist movement and ideology. Confronting the broader, more complex nationalist resurgence required new analytical tools and forms of political intervention. Anti-racism was also a central perspective for the protest movements of this period, and linked to a variety of projects including direct support for refugees and victims of racist violence, and countering the renationalization of collective identity during and immediately following the, quote, unification process. Yet this perspective could not address the power ambitions of the expanded Germany in the new geopolitical situation, closely connected to the logic of international capitalist competition between states. The, quote, colonization of Eastern Europe, end quote, as the movement described the German state's international political ambitions, was not based on racial ideologies. It was in this context that a specific anti-national perspective therefore emerged to address a wide variety of social and political developments. This anti-national perspective incorporated both anti-fascism and anti-racism, yet transcending both anti-fascism and anti-racism, with the aim of grasping a broader and more fundamental political dynamic centered around the German nation-state in the post-socialist period. The anti-national left was therefore not the product of abstract theoretical reflections. Rather, it emerged out of the concrete struggles against resurgent nationalism in the country during, quote, German reunification. Those involved in this small radical left tendency insisted that the new social and political terrain required the formulation of new political questions. The result of this practical and theoretical engagement was not an amended leftist worldview, in which the inherited tenets would be supplemented with an opposition to the nation. Instead, the encounter with nationalism resulted in a fundamental reorientation of a broad set of political assumptions and produced a deep restructuring in the content and contours of left politics and practice. As a result, the established left position on nationalism, which viewed it as nothing more than a form of propaganda used by manipulative elites to gain popular support, was contradicted by the clear production of nationalism from below, through the push for, quote, unification amongst the general population and the swelling in popular racism. The view that nationalism is merely the distortion of an otherwise positive collective expression which the left should simply redirect towards the quote correct targets, was revealed as a dangerous delusion in the face of extreme violence against asylum seekers and immigrants in the early 1990s, and the popular support for harsh restrictions on migration. As a result, the anti-national debates broke the bounds of a neatly defined concept of nationalism and began to interrogate the topic of the nation and nation-state more intensely. The critique of nationalism, the nation, and nation-state has important relevance for movements beyond Germany. In fact, it was in light of the U.S. left's failure to counter nationalism and anti-Semitism within the movement and society more broadly that sparked my original interest in the German anti-national tendency. Therefore, this book begins with a look at the U.S. context during the last decade, focusing specifically on the anti-globalization, anti-war/anti-imperialist, and Occupy movements in the U.S. I also outline some attempts from within these movements to go beyond such trappings. Afterwards, I set the background for the anti-national movement in Germany, closely explaining the nationalist resurgence in the social, political, and economic events following the opening of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. I cover the social, political, and economic changes during these years, especially the quote reunification of East and West Germany, the spike of racist violence from the German civilian population against migrants and asylum seekers, the accompanying media campaign against them, the sharpening of the ethnic character of citizenship and immigration laws, the abdication of asylum rights, and the geopolitical strivings of West Germany in the international context. The origins of the anti-national tendency are then described through two campaigns initiated in the early 1990s. The first was the mobilization against, quote, German reunification in 1989/1990 under the slogan, Never Again Germany, Nie wieder Deutschland. It was directed against the geopolitics of the German state and its power ambitions on the European and global stages following the collapse of the East-West Bloc confrontation. Yet the movement was also strongly opposed to the adaptation and conformity of the public and of sections of the left to these trends, and therefore had a strong focus on the bottom-up elements of the events of 1989 to 1990. While this mobilization gave birth to the anti-national tendency, the latter did not develop in a linear fashion, but rather its critique was taken up, renewed and reformulated by diverse social movements actors of the radical left political and cultural scene of West Germany, in their responses to divergent forms and dimensions of the new nationalism in the following years, as a wave of popular racism and nationalism swept across the country in the early 1990s. A concerted effort under the slogan, quote, something better than the nation, end quote, was organized, aimed at halting the physical violence of the German public against migrants and developing a counterpower to nationalism amongst the public in the media and in state policies. Rather than targeting the geopolitical agenda of the state, this group focused on the domestic scene, confronting racist and populist nationalism and public policy undermining migrant rights. In these two campaigns, you get a deep look at the movement's origins and some of its core principles. They are, however, only two examples of the ongoing development of an anti-national political tendency and critique which has developed over the last 2 decades. The movement has moved into various areas, for example, criticizing historical revisionist narratives that posit Germany as a victim of World War II, opposing a critique of, quote, globalization that presents capitalism as a foreign, Anglo-American phenomenon that is destroying otherwise healthy, quote, national communities, cultures, or nation-states, and critiquing support within the left and the broader society for radical Islamic movements following the attacks of September 11th, 2001, and the Second Intifada, and the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Anti-nationalists are also active today, for example, in the current protest against the economic crisis, where they oppose leftists who blame migrants for unemployment or wage dumping. These examples are not meant to provide a comprehensive list of the development of the anti-national left over the last 2 decades, but rather point to some highly divergent attempts to confront different expressions of nationalism in Germany in this period. The core aspect of the anti-national critique is that it does not seek to, quote, solve the problem of nationalism through pluralism. The anti-national critique does not advance concepts such as, quote, there's no quotation. The anti-national critique does not advance concepts such as multiculturalism or a multi-ethnic Germany or a pan-European or post-national identity. It does not try to expand the category of the nation to be more inclusive. One second. Wikipedia says post-nationalism or non-nationalism is the process or trend by which nation-states and national identities lose their importance relative to cross-nation and self-organized or supranational and global entities as well as local entities. Although post-nationalism is not strictly considered the antonym of nationalism, the two terms and their associated assumptions are antithetic, as post-nationalism is an internationalistic process. There are several factors that contribute to aspects of post-nationalism, including economic, political, and cultural elements, increasing globalization of economic factors, such as the expansion of international trade with raw materials, manufactured goods and services, and the importance of multinational corporations and internationalization of financial markets have shifted emphasis from national economies to global economies. At the same time, socio-political power is partially transferred from national authorities to supranational entities, such as multinational corporations, the United Nations, the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and NATO. In addition, media and entertainment industries are becoming increasingly global and facilitate the formation of trends and opinions on a supranational scale. Migration of individuals or groups between countries contributes to the formation of post-national identities and beliefs, even though attachment to citizenship and national identities often remains important. Back to the text. Where am I? Anti-national critique does not try to expand the category of the nation to be more inclusive. Instead, the anti-national critique seeks to overthrow the category of the nation completely or break the category of the nation open. The project does not flee into abstract universalism, but directly counters the concrete forms of nationalism existent in their social context. The anti-national critique does not affirm pluralism as a political strategy, but harnesses the, quote, power of negativity, end quote, to overthrow the concrete social forms of capitalist society and nation-states. This sketch of the broad contours of the anti-national tendency will become more filled out in the specific presentations of the two mobilizations as well as in the summary of the anti-national left tendency following the descriptions of the two campaigns. I will show how this movement, in response to concrete social and political transformations, developed a new perspective on nationalism. In the conclusion, I address the contours of the anti-nationalist perspective, contrasting it with the orientation of the traditional left and its positive relationship with the nation, and suggest the international relevance of an anti-national critique for leftists in other social and political contexts. I hope that my reconstruction of the anti-national struggles will reveal the theoretical framework of the anti-national critique that has developed in sections of the contemporary German left over the last 2 decades. I will show how this movement, in response to concrete social and political transformations, developed a new perspective on nationalism. My aim is to increase attention on the left in, I think this is a typo, other national context to the role of, quote, the national in contemporary social and political developments and in capitalist society more generally, in order to make it an object of critique for an emancipatory movement. And I hope to do this without giving the impression that the specific perspective that has developed in the German context represents the, quote, correct position, theoretical framework, or praxis. Instead, these examples represent a particular attempt to respond to new circumstances by developing new theory. Where they challenged left dogmas, they were at their strongest, yet where they established new dogmas, they failed to hold on to their original critical intentions. Okay, so that's the end of the introduction to Against the Nation, Against the Nation, Anti-National Politics in Germany by Robert Ogman. Thank you so much for listening.